Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
I believe if you were to poll most people and ask them what they feel that they lack most in, it's either going to be the answer of time, money, or energy. And energy is something that we certainly can focus in on. We know that energy is so incredibly important to how we function every single day. If we are stressed out, our energy stores can go down. If we're not eating right, if we're eating, nutrient empty foods, we're not going to be sourcing energy from those foods to actually fuel our bodies. So there's a lot of different ways in which energy can really help to enhance our overall sense of well-being. And if we're lacking in energy, then we definitely need to be taking the appropriate steps to address that. And that's what I want to talk about today. I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and I want to talk today about ATP. The body itself is such a unique organism, and because of its uniqueness, it takes and requires so much energy just to maintain proper functioning. And oftentimes we underfuel our bodies to such a degree that we just kind of stumble through our day, and over the course of years and decades, this will eventually start to catch up, and you start to get into this very energy deficient state. So the form of energy that we consider to be the energy currency of the cells is known as ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. And this is the primary source of energy for use and storage at that cellular level. So we're talking about all cells throughout the body. Now, what ATP actually is, it is a nucleoside triphosphate, which means it is consisting of a base, which is the adenine, a ribose sugar, and these three bonded phosphate groups. So hence we have ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So what we generally just refer to this is the main energy to which all cells produce, and that's within that mitochondria. We know that that's that little energy maker within the cells themselves. Now, we know that in addition to providing energy, we also recognize that ATP serves a whole slew of different functions within the cell, including the proper signaling of the DNA and the RNA synthesis within the cell itself. So this is very important. So if we're lacking that ATP, that's going to impact the way that the cells themselves can replicate and the information is passed along. Because if we're screwing up DNA and RNA synthesis, then that means that is going to become problematic for us. We certainly recognize that when we look at all of the different functions of different cellular systems, cellular respiration, for example, we look at oxidation, there's different ways in which ATP is utilized in that source of energy to really control and regulate these multiple catabolic mechanisms that actually occur within each cell. And we know that we require an awful lot of ATP each and every single day to ensure proper functioning. So if we're not getting proper nutrients from our diet and we are following that standard American diet, we're not getting adequate sleep, and we're not hydrated, and all of the different things, you can see how the cells can start to struggle over time, which can become incredibly problematic. Now, what's very, very interesting is that through scientific advancements, we have gotten to the point where we can actually now utilize ATP in an oral supplementation form. So this is very good for a multitude of different reasons. Number one, if we are in a state that we know that we are probably energy deficient, if we have high stress, which many people do, if we have any type of a chronic disease state, so whether that be cardiovascular, whether that's diabetes, any type of autoimmune condition, arthritis, for example, anything that is going to disrupt the cellular biological functions in the body, then we know we probably need to get some additional ATP on board. So we're talking, 95% of the energy in the body is requiring ATP. So this is why when we look at chronic disease states, oftentimes people will complain about, I feel fatigued, I feel lethargic, I feel like I just don't have energy. But we are starting to see this more and more often in people that are quote unquote healthy, but yet still feel like they are lacking energy. So we have studied ATP in the setting of exercise science originally, and recognizing that when you add in oral supplementation of ATP, that this can really be beneficial for exercise by helping to enhance the muscle mass and the strength and support the overall health of the muscles themselves. So then we can kind of fast forward and say, okay, well, if it's beneficial for someone who's working out, then it would probably be beneficial for someone who's experiencing age-related muscle mass loss, such as sarcopenia. And indeed, they have studied ATP supplementation for that as well. Now, a really interesting study came out in the Journal of Rheumatology about a decade ago, and this was a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial looking at the utilization of oral supplementation of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, when it came to subacute low back pain. Now, very interesting, because we know ATP is used throughout the body in terms of that energy source. Remember, we now recognize that ATP is facilitating other processes as well. So in this particular study, they found that with oral ATP, so taking the ATP supplementation, that this actually had an acting effect in subacute low back pain. Now, why would they be studying this over a decade ago? Because they were looking for alternatives. They were looking for ways that people could avoid taking analgesics, taking the NSAIDs, the acetaminophen, all of those things that they know go with a whole slew of side effects, especially for someone who already has a potential underlying chronic disease state. So I find that to be really quite impressive. And there was a statistical significant change between the two groups. In the group given ATP versus the placebo, they really did see a positive impact from using the ATP. Now, we know that in the Journal of Anesthesia, they also looked at the clinical applications for the utilization of ATP for pain control. So once again, here's another pain aspect for ATP. Now, this is interesting because when you look at the way the original studies with ATP and looking at people working out and helping with muscle fatigue and muscle mass, a lot of times when people work out, they get sore afterwards. And they were finding that when they used ATP, they were less sore and had more energy and felt stronger. So then you kind of flash forward here and you see, okay, hey, this makes sense that they're looking at ATP as having these other functions and potential health outcomes for people. And they found in this particular study that ATP compounds, so the ATP oral supplementation, have significant potential for alleviating various types of pain. Now, I'm not going to get heavy into the science on this, but they were looking at specific receptor-mediated sites to see how it was exactly that ATP was working. And part of that came down to targeting the inflammation process, and the other came down to the desensitization of the pain itself. So when we think about the nerve signaling pathways, which I think is really quite impressive, but we can kind of jump to some of those initial studies looking at the effect of oral supplementation when it comes to anaerobic power and muscle strength. So in the Journal of Medical Science and Sports Exercise, they looked at a 14-day trial. So 14 days of giving people ATP and looking at their different indices when it came to anaerobic capacity and muscle strength. So they took a group of healthy males and they said, okay, let's give them 150 milligrams of ATP daily, and let's just see over the course of this 14 days if they're going to see any type of an improvement when we look at their strength, when we look at their energy. And they found at the end of that 14 days of giving these healthy male athletes ATP that it did provide these very important effects in terms of muscle strength, in terms of energy. So you can see why it would be that someone would want to potentially add ATP into their daily routine. Now, here's another study that came out, and this was a more recent study in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning, and they found that just a single dose of oral ATP supplementation improves performance and physiological response during resistance exercise. This is impressive because we're talking about just a single dose. And they found in this that a single oral dose of ATP supplementation improved lower body resistance training performance and energy expenditure. Impressive stuff. One single dose. And they were seeing this benefit. Now, how much were they using? 400 milligrams in this particular study. Now, why do I mention that? Because when you look at the Invite Health ATP supplement, one capsule yields you 400 milligrams. And that study that they just came out with indicated that one dose, so just one capsule of that 400 milligrams, was enough to show improvement in just one use. So there's a lot of different ways in which ATP can be supportive to our health. We look at just the basic bare bone reason as to why the body contains ATP. It is the primary energy currency within the cells. 95% of the cells in the body require ATP as their primary source for fuel. But we also now recognize that ATP is playing a role when it comes to pain and easing discomfort. We recognize that it is playing a significant role in so many other functions besides just for energy. So I had mentioned, the maintaining muscle mass, which is important if we have age-related muscle mass loss, sarcopenia. A lot of different ways in which ATP can be beneficial when we think of it as a supplement. So I definitely encourage you to go to our website, invitehealth.com, check out the ATP HX. This is in our Power Plant line of formulations. We have a lot of folks who have utilized this formulation. Maybe they're, big into going to the gym and they say, you know what, I take a capsule of the ATP and I find that, I really have a better workout when I incorporate ATP in. Now, here's one little tip. I will encourage you to take it on an empty stomach. I do find that the ATP, in terms of the absorption and the way that the body facilitates that ATP, works better on an empty stomach. So that's just one little tip. But I also have other people who have reported back that when they use ATP, say, for example, they have one of those chronic diseases that I had mentioned, diabetes and heart disease and, high blood pressure, all of those things, and sometimes in combination, all of them. And they have found that when they start to incorporate ATP into their routine, they see a significant shift in terms of their energy. Same thing when we have someone who is going through any type of a injury. Maybe you had a recent surgery on the shoulder or hip or something along that line. And by incorporating ATP in as part of your post-op recovery, oftentimes people will feel as though that recovery process is a bit smoother. And understanding the physiology of adenosine triphosphate in the body, it certainly makes a lot of sense as to why people would report that back. So that is all that I have for you for today. I just want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Now, do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health, and we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.